Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. And welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. I'm your host, Mike Chapman. If you ever want to join us live, you can learn more about how to do so on my website, polarlifeconsulting.com/live. And today I'm going to talk about ACEs, ACE, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And let me give you the background on this. I have detailed information on that within husband material. And I actually, in the show notes, will have a handout, PDF with all of these links, all this information about the ACE test and the results. First, from NPR, they talk about the ACE score is a tally of different types of abuse, neglect, and other hallmarks of a rough childhood. According to the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, the rougher your childhood, the higher your score is likely to be, and the higher your risk for later social and health problems. Wikipedia gives this background. The Adverse Childhood Experiences study, also called the ACE study, ACE, is a research study conducted by the American Health Maintenance Organization, Kaiser Permanente, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Participants were recruited to the study between 1995 and 1997 and have been in long-term follow-up for health outcomes. The study has demonstrated an association of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, aka childhood trauma, with health and social problems across the lifespan. The study has produced many scientific articles and conference and workshop presentations that examine ACEs. The next is from the website ACEs Too High. Again, links are in the show notes and in the PDF. It mentions there's many types of childhood trauma: racism, bullying, watching a sibling being abused, losing a caregiver, whether that's a grandmother, a mother, or a grandfather, homelessness, surviving and recovering from a severe accident, witnessing a father being abused by a mother, witnessing a grandmother abusing a father, involvement with the foster care system, involvement with the juvenile justice system, etc. The ACE study included only those 10 childhood traumas because those were mentioned as most common by a group of about 300 Kaiser members. Those traumas were also well studied individually in the research literature. The most important thing to remember is that the ACE score is meant as a guideline. If you experienced other types of toxic stress over months or years, then those would likely increase your risk of health consequences. And by the way, lest you think that the ACE study was yet another involving inner city poor people of color, take note. The study's participants were 17,000, mostly white, middle and upper class, college educated San Diegans, so those in the San Diego, California area with good jobs and great health care. They all belonged to the Kaiser Permanente HMO, Health Maintenance Organization. So here's the meat of it. And for those who have joined me live on the podcast, feel free to add your questions into chat. And again, you can be as anonymous as you would like. And we will only state your name if you manually type it in with your question. Here's the question. With those 10 different types of traumas that were most common, question 1, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Question 2, Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you? Or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Question 3. Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Question 4. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Question 5. Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? Or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Question 6. Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Question 7. Was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes, often, or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or knife? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Question 8. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Number 9. Was a household member depressed or mentally ill? Or did a household member attempt suicide? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Number 10. Did a household member go to prison? Yes or no? If yes, enter 1. Now, add up all the yeses. That is your ACE score. Now, in the PDF, in the show notes, are all the different charts that came up from that ACE is too high as a result of the study, how it can affect your health and well-being as an adult. So adverse childhood experiences are common. For those that they are common, substance abuse is 27%, parental separation or divorce 23%, mental illness 17%, battered mother 13%, criminal behavior 6%. And those were 5 of the 10 questions. The others, the abuse, psychological abuse 11%, physical abuse 28%, sexual abuse 21%. That's just within the study. These are the results. For the 2 neglect questions, emotional neglect was 15%. Physical neglect was 10%. And those were the categories, the 10 most common types of adverse child experiences. So those 10 got included in the survey. It doesn't mean that any other trauma wouldn't count against you, but the statistics of this test, they narrowed the focus to those top 10 experiences. Now, if you look at the charts in the PDF, you'll see they usually only do a bar chart of 0, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 plus or 4 and 5 plus. That's all they do, I think, because so few had more than 5. But it's so profound. So the first chart that I list is adult alcoholism. So for those with 0 A score of 0, it's a little higher than 2%, almost 3%, it looks like, have alcoholism. A score of 1 brings it up to almost 6%. A score of 2, over 10%, have alcoholism. A score of 3 brings it up to almost 12%. 4 or more pushes it over 16%, have problems with alcoholism as an adult. Chronic depression. For women, it's higher than men. For women, with an ACE score of 0 for the control, it was just under 20. By the time you get to 4 or more, it's close to 60% experience chronic depression. For men, it goes from just over 10, so around 11, all the way up to 35%. So over a third of men experience chronic depression with a score of 4 or higher. Next is use of antidepressant prescriptions. And it says prescription rate per 100 person years. Okay. Approximately 50 years later after they've used, I don't know why it's specified that, but the control, if you had a score of 0, it's around 35 years or percent. I don't know. Prescription rate per 100. So for 100 years. So I guess, yeah, 35%. If it's 4 or more, is close to 100, and 5 or more, it's at 100. Next chart, ACE score and the risk of perpetrating domestic violence, being violent against others as an adult. From the control of 0, it's about between 2 and 3, it looks like. And then for a score of 4, for women, it jumps to about 6%. For men, it jumps all the way to, looks like about 11%. For women 5 or higher, it goes up to uh, a little over 10%. For men 5 or more, it's about 13%. For the prevalence of liver disease, hepatitis, or jaundice, the general population, for those who were studied who scored 0, it was between 4 and 6%, probably around 5%. And if you had a score of 2, it got closer to 8. A score of 3 was 10, and 4 or more was about 11. So 11%, 11% with a score of 4 or more, 11% had a prevalence of liver disease, including hepatitis or jaundice. And there's a lot more in here. Smoking as an adult, those go up. That one lists 4 or 5, and then 6 or more. And that goes up compared to 0 at about 7%. It jumps up with 6 or more to 17% become smokers as an adult. Later being raped, I'm assuming as an adult, less than 5% with a score of 0 jumps up to over 30%, almost a third becoming raped as an adult with a score of 4 or more. Suicide attempts with a score of 0, it's about 1 to 2%. With a score of 3, that goes to 11. With a score of 4 or higher, it's almost 20% attempt suicide. Teen sexual behaviors. Intercourse by age 15, with a score of 0 is about 6. 4 or more, it jumps to close to 30%. Teen pregnancy for females who scored 0, it's actually at 20%. And 4 or more, it doubles to over 40%. For paternity, meaning you father a child, so for the males, it's about 15% with a score of 0. With a score of 4 or more, it jumps up to about 35%, so a third. Impaired work performance, absenteeism, prevalence of impaired performance. Absenteeism, if a score of 0 is about 6%. For 4 or more, it jumps up to 15%. Serious financial problems, just over 10% with a score of 0. With a score of 4 or more, it jumps up to about 22%. Serious problems performing jobs. With a score of 0, it's about a 6%. With a score of 4 or more, it's about 17%. COPD, which is a lung disease, a score of 0 still gets you about 7% have COPD as a problem. With a score of 4, it jumps up to almost 18%. They say what causes this. They, at around the same time this ACE study was being done, they also had research on children's brains, finding that toxic stress damages the structure and function of a child's developing brain. This was determined by a group of neuroscientists and pediatricians, including those from Harvard and Rockefeller University and the Child Trauma Academy. When children are overloaded with stress hormones, they're in that flight, fright, or freeze mode. They can't learn in school. They often have difficulty trusting adults or developing healthy relationships with peers, meaning they become loners. To relieve their anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, and or inability to focus, they turn to easily available biochemical solutions, nicotine, alcohol, marijuana, methamphetamines, or activities in which they can escape their problems, high-risk sports, proliferation of sexual partners, and work overachievement. Yeah, so examples, nicotine reduces anger, increases focus, and relieves depression. Alcohol relieves stress. Using drugs or overeating or engaging in risky behaviors leads to consequences as a direct result of this behavior. For example, smoking can lead to COPD or lung cancer. Overeating can lead to obesity and diabetes. In addition, there is increasing research that shows that severe and chronic stress leads to bodily systems producing an inflammatory response that leads to disease. In addition, toxic stress can be passed down from generation to generation. The field of epigenetics, meaning passing on things from one generation to another, shows that we are born with a set of genes that can be turned on and off depending on what's happening in our environment. If a child grows up with an overload of toxic stress, their stress response genes are likely to be activated so that they are easily triggered by stressful situations that don't affect those who don't grow up with toxic stress. They can pass that response on to their children. Fortunately, brains and lives are somewhat plastic. That's something that they now call neuroplasticity, one of my favorite terms. Resilience research shows that appropriate integration of resilience factors, such as asking for help, developing trusting relationships, forming a positive attitude, listening to feelings, those can help people improve their lives. And you can ask yourself, how do I work against it? I took the test. Mine was kind of high, high meaning 3 or 4 or 5. I believe mine is 5, probably 6, somewhere in there. What do you do? And recently, I attended a conference on human trafficking. If you know my story, you know I was sexually trafficked. In one of the sessions, they talked specifically about this test, the adverse child experiences. And the speaker had themselves attended a workshop on ACEs, and those who score a 6 or more out of 10 on average have a lifespan that is decreased by 20 years. She told the speaker that she had 9 out of the 10 and asked what she could do to counteract the effects. He said the best way to counter the effects of a high ACE score is autobiographical journaling, meaning using journaling, whether electronically or pen on paper, to tell your story. write it down, and get it out. Getting it out of your head and onto paper or electronic paper actually is healing you. And that's the whole theme of this podcast. Overriding theme is the power of story. So people talk about when you share your story, it's healing. It feels healing. Your healing just takes a huge leap by telling your story, whether it's on this podcast or writing it down or sharing it. However you do it, there's power. There's healing power in the telling of your story. That's one of the powers of story. Once you write it down, if you want, share it here on the podcast, share it in my chat room, share it in the forums. All that information is also on my website. And links to those things are also in the show notes on how you can find these things. Most are free. Find someone to tell your story. Get it out of your head. It is healing. Tell your story. And then you can look at it. If you share it in one of these public things, either one of my groups or there's other groups such as Male Survivor and other groups out there where you can share anonymously if you wish. There's several Facebook groups as well and other social media places where you can share your story safely and get it out. And you'll get feedback too. You'll get support. You'll hear from others who have similar experiences who can support you. And you are not alone. And help to know that the abuse was not your fault. So take the quiz, PDFs in the show notes. Let me know how it goes. Would love to hear from you. I know mine is probably around a 5 or 6, I believe. When I took it last, probably a 6. And I'm doing okay, but I'm also writing my story and sharing my story and getting it out and getting more and more of my story out. And it is so healing. So do what you need to do to get your story out. Tell your story. Autobiographical journey. And with that, we'll see you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Live Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarliveconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled Polar. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.